Today on 10-Minute IT Jams, we're joined by Paula De Matos, who is the Chief Product Officer at SYSPRO. Paula joins us today to discuss how ERP can help ensure better supply chain resilience. Thanks for coming along, Paula, and welcome to the Jam.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So just to start off, what are the local manufacturers doing to help build Australia's sovereign manufacturing capabilities?
I think if we have a look at certainly what the disruptions has brought us over the last 2 years, COVID, and even more recently, if we look at the disruptions with the Ukraine and the Russian conflict, is there are disruptions that are going to be occurring onto the supply chain. Obviously, this affects the nation's capabilities in its manufacturing output and its manufacturing abilities in order to produce to meet market demands. I think this is no different than in Australia. Certainly for local manufacturers, and a big drive has been to be looking at shifting some of those manufacturing processes to reshore them. And that really just offers the ability to provide a more resilient supply chain in the manufacturing processes. And really, I think that this will be a big drive, certainly in the Australian landscape.
For sure. And how will boosting sovereign manufacturing drive Australian economic recovery?
Well, I think if you have a look at historically the manufacturing sector, certainly in the small to medium sized tiers, in the mid-market and in the lower end of the market, that tends to be the areas where there is the highest degrees of growth. So certainly any investment in this area would mean that you're likely to see the spurring on of new innovation. You're also likely to see a very upbeat market as far as labour is concerned. And really governments tend to always be looking at trying to develop this particular sector in the manufacturing industries.
And how can Australia build a more kind of resilient supply chain going forward?
I think there's a couple of lessons, again, that was learned from the disruptions. Certainly in the past, supply chains were basically configured to be looking at cost optimization first. That's really the patterns of certainly over the last 2 decades. Now it's a case that manufacturers need to be considering supply chain resiliency. And with that, there's a multitude of policies. The first is on their procurement, looking at multi-sourcing. So instead of just looking at single source supply, being able to be readily available to source from multiple locations geopolitically across the world, or looking to source locally. And I think that Australia-made and sourcing locally is definitely a policy that should be looked at and pursued. The second is having the supply chains collaborate a lot to a much higher degree. And here we can use technologies, for example, such as blockchain. So all the stakeholders that are sitting in a particular supply chain are talking and providing a lot of status updates as far as the movement of parts, availability of parts, production totals, production availability. And this allows for people either upstream or downstream to react a lot more quicker to changes that happen in that supply chain. So those are our 2 big changes. The third, of course, is the smart manufacturing. The smart manufacturing is the automation and to have the artificial intelligence and utilizing all of Industry 4.0 with the digital transformations to be able to react to changes in the supply chain a lot quicker. And those are the 3 big pillars that organizations are looking at, in particular the manufacturing industry, to provide a far more resilient supply chain, able to react a lot quicker to big disruptions like we've seen with the pandemic, and certainly the latest one with the crisis in Ukraine and Russia.
And how can Australian manufacturers become more competitive in a global supply chain?
That's a really great question. Australia has always been a country that has focused on producing high quality products that are personalized, that certainly talk to the types of service type of organizations that the Australian manufacturers tend to provide. I think with that continued drive and certainly utilizing a lot of the basis as to some of the benefits of manufacturing in Australia. Certainly the availability of inputs, everything from raw materials to its labor market, that is a highly skilled labor market, means that we can actually produce a quality product more readily, and again making that available on a global stage is definitely an area that needs to be focused on.
And just to finish off, how technology specifically, and specifically enterprise resource planning or ERP help build better manufacturing capabilities furthermore in Australia?
Well, if you consider that manufacturing really is about it's sort of a marriage of resources, assets, machinery, production. It's also about the processes and the people, and that's really underpinned with the systems. And the systems is what brings it all together. And really, for that to be work harmoniously in there, it's about balancing the demand and with the supply. Everything from the internal supply chain to the internal production lines to incorporating the broader complete supply chain, dealing with all stakeholders such as suppliers and customers. And really, this is where ERP plays a significant role, especially in the next evolution of ERP. And we see that the transition from ERP systems shifting from the traditional systems of record to now being the systems of analysis and the systems of information. And that really assists in the decision-making process, assisting organizations to be better, to being far more efficient, and to be looking at their manufacturing processes as being not only a cost competitive, but being able to react to the changes in the ecosystems far more readily. And enterprise resource planning assists in that.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today, Paula, and we appreciate your expertise, and we look forward to hearing more from SYSPRO in the future.
Thank you so much.